is Powfoot, and I'm here to bring you more exciting smuggling tales. Today we will hear about salt, brandy and the end of the smuggling era. Before the A75 was built, the villages of Ruthwell and Cummertrees were situated along the main highway between England and Scotland. Because of this, a great deal of smuggled goods passed through them, often landed at Powfoot on the coast. Powfoot here was so deeply involved in smuggling brandy that one of the village streets is named Brandy Loaning. They also used to joke here that they ate brandy porridge for breakfast. In Cummertrees, Hill House was actually purpose-built by smugglers to hide contraband. Ruthwell, though, was perhaps the most fiercely in favour of smuggling of the three villages. It used to be said that the people of Ruthwell were such friends to the running that they will not for any money give lodgings amongst themselves to any revenue officer. But it went a bit further than that too. Last time I mentioned reports of violent gangs of women attacking excisemen in Dumfriesshire. Well, in Ruthwell, an attack took place that prompted the revenue collector at Dumfries, MacDougall of Logan, to complain to his superiors that his men could not go about their duties under such dangerous conditions. It's no small wonder he complained though. They had seized a cask of brandy in the village and a mob of 100 angry women hunted it down, armed with pitchforks and clubs, and seized it back. Perhaps one reason for this hostility towards the excise was to do with the taxation of salt. After the wars of Scottish independence, Robert the Bruce had awarded the villagers a charter to make salt in return for their aid. The charter made salt making a major industry there until Oliver Cromwell levied a tax on it in 1656. The trade through these three villages became so brisk that by 1709 the merchants of Dumfries complained to the Convention of Royal Boroughs about it. Two fast ships were bought at Whitehaven in Cumbria, but after only 15 years in 1724, that was no longer enough. The merchants complained again, and this time two well-armed ships were added to the fleet, one based at Silloth in Cumbria and one at Annan. Smaller boats were also added to the fleet to patrol the creeks and the shoreline. There were many other efforts made over the years to tackle the trade in the Solway, but it wasn't until the early 19th century that there seemed to be any sign of ending the so-called free trade. William Pitt the Younger, perhaps inspired by the work of Adam Smith, made efforts to try and deal with smuggling that were aimed at reducing the profit that could be made from it. Duty on tea was greatly reduced. Licences were introduced for the making of goods such as beer, whisky, brandy, calico and candles. Duty for some wines and spirits meant for home consumption was scrapped for 2 years. Other measures were more punitive. Ships sailing within 4 leagues of the coast carrying spirits or wine would be forfeit along with their cargo if caught. Shooting at a naval, customs or excise officer became a capital offence. These changes in legislation soon had their effects on the local economy. In the very first statistical account of Scotland, many ministers reported an uptick in the number of poor parishioners in need of aid. They put the blame on government efforts to stamp out the smuggling trade. Annan bucked the trend and began to prosper during the early decades of the 19th century. It may well have been the profits of smuggling that helped to build the quay at Port Street, since the town had long had very deep connections with the trade. The quay provided for a great deal of Annan's newfound prosperity. Elsewhere on the Solway, Pitt's legislation was really beginning to bite. Nicknamed the Burning and Starving Act by the smugglers themselves, it included a radical reorganisation of the Coast Guard service. New stations with barracks were built up and down the Solway, allowing the Coast Guards ample manpower to patrol the waters. New signalling stations were also built, providing much more effective communication and watchtowers to observe for rogue signals along the hills and shoreline. Fines of up to £100, which is nearly £10,000 now, or a year of hard labour, were handed out to people caught signalling at night. Smugglers themselves could be given 1 to 3 years hard labour if caught. Informants were paid 20 shillings per person that was arrested, which is equivalent to £100 today. There were other factors apart from new legislation at play. In 1828, the remaining rights of the Duke of Atholl in the Isle of Man were bought out, denying smugglers the use of the island's harbours for transferring goods. And at most of Dumfries and Galloway's ports, revenue from international trade was beginning to be affected by the arrival of the railways, which, of course, allowed for much more efficient transport of goods overland. Smuggling by ship had become rare by Victorian times, but smuggling by train remained relatively common. People would actually be searched for goods when travelling between Gretna and Carlisle. Railway companies put up notices warning their customers that any amount of spirits carried without permit would be seized by customs. This ended when excise duties between Scotland and England were finally abolished as late as 1854. The smuggling era on the Solway coast came to an effective end then, but lived on through the romantic works of Sir Walter Scott and S.R. Crockett, as well as the works of smuggling scholars like Gordon Irving and John Thompson, whose books I used extensively in my research. There are far more smuggling tales in those books than I have had time to cover in this series, but hopefully I have been able to bring you a sense of those wild and rebellious times in Dumfries and Galloway's past. In fact, I hope that I have been able to convince you that this corner of Scotland is not a sleepy, forgotten place at all, but one with a vibrant past and a beautiful landscape that remain deeply entwined.